I am Dr. Emilio Pantojas García. I am a senior researcher at the Center for Social Research and professor of sociology at the University of Puerto Rico, Rio Piedras campus.
Is Puerto Rico a colony?
Yes. It is defined as a possession of the United States, but Puerto Rico is, being a U.S. possession means that Puerto Rico belongs to, but it is not a part of the United States. The Puerto Rican paradox is that Puerto Ricans are neither anti-American nor pro-American. And we are not a nation state, but we are a nation. We are a nation without a state. Puerto Ricans are a Latin American nation. We speak Spanish. Our literature is in Spanish. Our writers, the writers of Puerto Rican literature, receive prizes in Hispanic American and Spanish contests internationally. Our music is in Spanish, although there is music in English as well, of course. And we speak 3 languages. Spanish is our vernacular, English is our second language, and Spanglish is the language of the diaspora. The effect of colonialism over Puerto Rican people has been one of identity crisis. You catch it up in airports when we travel to foreign lands, and they ask you, what are you? And some people say, I'm American. And then they look at you like with that accent or with that face. And then you have to explain yourself. Well, I'm an American citizen, but born in Puerto Rico. And what is interesting is that sometimes when I went to study in England, for example, they said, where are you? I said, from Puerto Rico. Are you an American citizen? Yes, I am. But Costa Rica is not the United States. I said, no, it's not Costa Rica, it's Puerto Rico. And I had to explain to the custom people, to the immigration people, that what Puerto Rico was. And then finally someone said, it's in the West Indies. Yes, yes. Well, I think the Puerto Rican paradox was best illustrated by a decision in the Supreme Court in the early 20th century, which declared that Puerto Ricans were foreign in a domestic sense. That is, we're foreign people because we speak Spanish as our vernacular, which is a foreign language. We are a Latin American nation, but we are domestic in so much as we are a possession of the United States or a colony of the United States. Well, Puerto Rico today is a post-colonial colony. I mean, colonialism hasn't always been the same. There is the colonialism of Puerto Rico between 1898 and 1948, the end of World War II. And Puerto Rico was the poorest country in Latin America and the Caribbean. And in fact, Governor Tugwell and the son of Roosevelt, who was a governor of Puerto Rico, they both talk about Puerto Rico as the stricken land, the poorhouse of the Caribbean. And they were very concerned that the United States would have such a poor dependency in the Caribbean. It was a bad example. It was un-American to do that. After World War II, if you look at U.S. policy towards Puerto Rico, there was a decision because of decolonization. Remember, World War II is supposed to put an end to world colonialism. It is dismantling the British Empire. It is dismantling the French Empire. Self-determination, self-rule, independence is the norm. The Americans do not want to let go of Puerto Rico, and therefore they afford Puerto Rico a measure of self-rule with the elective governor in 1948. In 1952, they allowed Puerto Ricans to draw their own constitution, the Commonwealth Constitution, which is subordinated to the U.S. Constitution, of course. And sovereignty remains in the hands of the U.S. Congress. But in that sense, the key element of the post-1948 decision in terms of public policy towards Puerto Rico, what you would call federal relations between Puerto Rico and the United States, is the fact that Puerto Rico would be better off than their neighbors, but not necessarily equal to the states. And if you look at the path of Puerto Rico in terms of economic development, in terms of political development, from 1948 to the present, it has been one where Puerto Rico has been elevated above its neighbors in terms of the standard of living, in terms of income, but it is still not equal to the United States. So it is better than Latin America and the Caribbean, but not as good as the States. That's what the outcome of that policy has been. Well, this plebiscite is going to decide nothing. I mean, there have been 3 plebiscites before, one in 1967, one in 1993 and one in 1998. In the plebiscite of 1967, Commonwealth got 60% of the vote. And statehood got 36% of the vote. Independent got a negligible amount. In 1993, statehood grew significantly with 46% of the vote. Commonwealth got about 48% of the vote. And independence got, again, less than 5%. What is interesting is that you anticipated growth. I mean, from 36% to 46% in a few decades. The statehood movement was up and coming. Yet in the 1998 plebiscite, statehood got 46% again. It did not grow, even though the government in power was a pro-statehood government and it had been re-elected. So the government in 1993 and 1998 was pro-statehood. And the last government, Rosselló government in 96, had won by 1 million votes, unprecedented in Puerto Rican history. Yet they did not go beyond 46%. In that plebiscite, the alternative that won was something very peculiar called none of the above. The people in Commonwealth, knowing that they would not win because the vote had been split through treachery and manipulation, decided to vote with the pro-independence people, electorate for none of the above. And the alternative that won in 1998 was none of the above. In the 2012 elections, the alternatives are statehood, independence, and what they call sovereign Commonwealth. I don't expect statehood to get 50% or more. I would expect sovereign Commonwealth to get a plurality, and independence to get a small cast of the vote, 5% or less. I don't think it's going to decide anything. Then they also say that if no clear message is sent, President Obama has said that if no clear message is sent in the 2012 plebiscite in Puerto Rico, he will act to resolve Puerto Rican status question. He said that in order to gain sympathy with the Puerto Rican vote, of course, which is important in Florida and in New York and the northeastern corridor. But the fact of the matter is that this has been done before. In 1989, President Bush, the first, decided that he wanted the Puerto Rican issue resolved. He expressed in his address to Congress, the presidential address, that he wanted this solved, that he favored statehood for Puerto Rico. Senator Bennett Johnston opened up a series of hearings which can be considered the widest and most honest and deep consultation with the people of Puerto Rico. He actually came up with a bill for Congress that was supposed to be self-executing. Once it was approved, it will start in motion the process of decision-making with predetermined processes, with a protocol. The bill never saw the day of light. It was, as we say in Puerto Rico, put in a drawer. And so it has been done before. I don't think that until we Puerto Ricans send a clear message that we want this issue solved, Congress is going to do nothing. Because as a professor of political science once said, Congress giveth and Congress taketh away. And if Congress has the sovereignty over Puerto Rico, they are not going to relinquish it unless there are problems. Well, a clear message would be something more than 50%. I mean, if you have 46% and 48%, you have a deadlock. If you have a vote where the majority says none of the above, what are you saying? There is no clear message. Puerto Ricans are neither anti-Americans nor pro-Americans in the petty Yankee type thing. Puerto Ricans are apparently pretty content with what they have. And the fact of the matter is no one is really satisfied with Commonwealth, but no one has really wants an alternative. So you're stuck. You're in a logjam. You're deadlock. And that's the problem. No one has come up with a solution to that deadlock. First of all, Puerto Rico is not high in the agenda of any North American congressman or citizen, unless you live in a district where it's inhabited by thousands of Puerto Rico, like in New York or New Jersey or Florida. If you are in Ohio, Puerto Rico is not high in the agenda. If you are in California, Puerto Rico is not high in the agenda, even though there is a substantial community of Puerto Ricans in California. The average American, what it's interesting, I mean, my neighbors when I lived there, they were puzzled by the fact that Puerto Ricans would not choose statehood overwhelmingly during the 1993 plebiscite and again during the 1998 plebiscite. I was asked, what's the deal? Why don't you choose for statehood? Don't you like us? And I had to explain to them that it wasn't a matter of liking or not liking the Americans. It was a matter of political convenience, economic considerations. Puerto Ricans do like to have an American passport and to be American citizens. They do like to be better off than most of Latin America, even if they are worse off than most of the states of the Union. But they have the option to migrate, and they constantly go back and forth between Puerto Rico and the United States. Therefore, it's one of those paradoxes. It's one of those unsolved issues. What will solve it? I don't know. Second, Puerto Ricans are mostly Democrats. If you look at the primaries in Puerto Rico, the Republican primary is a very small affair. So what happened during the after Bennett Johnston in the 1990s, I think it was, a congressman from Alaska tried to, he was a Republican, tried to pass another legislation, another bill in Congress, and the Republicans did not back it up because Puerto Rico would be a democratic state. The Republicans will never want Puerto Rico to be a state of the Union unless there is either parity or balance, but we are a democratic state. So we're a Spanish-speaking democratic state that it's an island outside of Puerto Rico with a Latin American culture. I don't think that there is a lot of support among Americans for statehood. It is unlikely that the United States would unilaterally give independence to Puerto Ricans. And Puerto Ricans, there is no majority to warrant such an action from Congress. On the other hand, you have to understand that Puerto Rico is a strategic military bastion. It was for the Spanish. It was for the British who tried to invade Puerto Rico a number of times and they couldn't take it. And Puerto Rico is the easternmost island of the North Atlantic within the Caribbean.
But is that still relevant right now?
It is not relevant for warfare, for global warfare, as it used to be during the high time of NATO, but it is important in terms of the war against drugs. There are two corridors, two points of entries, one in the Caribbean, which is Puerto Rico, and one in Central America, which is Mexico. And so these are the two entry points for the cocaine trade. And therefore, Puerto Rico is very important in what is, at this time, the most important security concerns of the United States, which are drugs and undocumented migration to the United States. And therefore, it is still strategically important. There are about $20 billion that the federal government spends in Puerto Rico, and part of it is in drug interdiction programs and programs of homeland security.
Are they beneficiary for Puerto Rico or are they hurtful for Puerto Rico?
The consensus in Puerto Rico is that because the United States flagships have the highest tariffs and highest costs in the world, or one of the highest, this is disadvantageous to Puerto Rico. If Puerto Rico, being a lesser developed economy, would be allowed to use, as Panama or Mexico, other types of transportation, other transportation with others registrations, say from Panama or Liberia, which are the cheapest at the time, that would represent a significant savings in terms of the importation of some goods.
Is Puerto Rico a good business for the United States?
It used to be. I don't know that it is anymore, but during the time of 936 corporations, which were tax-exempted transnational corporations producing goods for the international market, the United States would make billions of dollars. In fact, at one point, the United States companies declared more income from Puerto Rico than from Canada and the United Kingdom, which were the next two the next two countries in terms of income for U.S. transnationals. The United Kingdom's economy is more than twice the Puerto Rican economy, and Canada is, again, more than twice. So these are bigger economies reflecting less income. Part of that was because of the tax-exempt nature of 936 corporations.
And after 936, what happened?
Well, in the short term, nothing did happen because of low interest rates. But eventually, the economy deteriorated. What happened was that a number of plants closed down. Puerto Rico, manufacturing plants. We're talking about pharmaceuticals. We're talking about anything and everything that had patents or had very profitable products that were protected by special recipes like Pepsi-Cola. At one point, Pepsi-Cola declared 22% of the worldwide profits in Puerto Rico. Puerto Ricans cannot drink, even if they wanted, 22% of the Pepsi-Cola in the world, can they? So this was basically accounting propositions. These were accounting tricks that companies were diverting their profits to Puerto Rico in order to avoid paying federal taxes.
All thanks to the territorial status.
Exactly. Because of the territorial status and because of a particular clause within the Internal Revenue Code that was, in this case, Section 936, that would allow U.S. companies to repatriate profits in Puerto Rico by paying a small tollgate tax and allowing them not to pay federal taxes.
So,
well, it did create some jobs. What happens is, remember, if you're talking about let's take, for example, the pharmaceutical industry. The pharmaceutical industry has a development component, research and development. Then they have the production component. And then they have the production component is segmented between the production of basic products or active ingredients, and then the assembling of those ingredients into the final product, which is a pill or a medicine, a dosage of a medicine. What happened was that research and development was done in the United States. At that stage, a company like, say, GDC, which in 1977 declared in Puerto Rico 150% of their global earnings, their global profits, 150. So I think they were of Illinois, GDC, Kankakee, Illinois. I remember speaking to one of their accountants in the 80s about how this worked. So they would take a tax break in Illinois. Then they would transfer the patent for the product to a Puerto Rican subsidiary. That Puerto Rican subsidiary would purchase at low cost the basic ingredients from GDC, will assemble it into a final pill form, and then they will sell it directly in the United States, making most of the profit in Puerto Rico. Hence, you could declare profits in losses in the United States, but profits in Puerto Rico. That's why 150% or something like that was the number. What was interesting is that the federal government would give those tax deductions for research and development, thinking that once the product was developed, they would recuperate through taxing the profits. But they were not taxing the profits because taxes were being legally evaded in Puerto Rico through 936. And in fact, that came to an end somewhat in 1984 with a law called the Tax Equity Fiscal Reform Act, TEFRA, of 1984. But that didn't plug all the holes, all the loopholes. 936 continued to be a very profitable status for many of these companies.
If we became a state, if Puerto Rico became a state, do you have any idea how much taxes we would pay? Federal income tax?
That would be speculating, but the fact of the matter is that
I want to understand that. Isn't there a specific number of a percentage, like the EWU in Puerto Rico, 7%? Most people can't tell me if Puerto Rico became a state, how much would the individual, what would be the tax bracket or the tax percentage an individual would pay under federal tax. Why is that? Why isn't there a specific numbers like, well, if we became a state, add 10% more taxes?
Frankly, I would think that no one has given it that much thought because it is not a likely possibility. On the other hand, I think that the deeper explanation may be every Puerto Rican that makes $50,000 or more pays about 34% of state income tax. Therefore, even if it was 6%, it will become 40% income tax. And the pro-stateholders have been very, very reluctant to come up with a transparent statement as to what it will mean for the tax payer in Puerto Rico to become a state of the union, because we all know that the local government can barely make ends meet with the tax rates that are there, and the Puerto Rico tax rates are higher than any of the United States. So if you put on top of that federal taxes, and this has been an old argument since I was a kid in the 1960s. They were talking about, if you become a state of the union, you have to pay taxes in addition to the local taxes, and the local taxes are high. It's an old argument, so that no one has actually given it enough thought as to make a study to say transparently, here it is. This will be your tax bill under statehood. No one wants to say that.
I want to say
you spoke to the economists,
yeah, no,
and they didn't know.
They didn't know. You're right.
Because no one have given it much thought.
I would have thought it would have been a simple mathematical explanation.
So would I.
But there
is no transparency in Puerto Rico.
Mean this amount of taxes. Period.
The same argument. Pro-stateholders says that if Puerto Rico becomes a state of the union, Puerto Rico can keep its own Olympic team. Is there a Hawaiian Olympic team? Is there an Alaskan Olympic team? I don't think so.
They were telling me Hong Kong. They were telling me.
Yeah, but Hong Kong was a British colony, and it was, and when it became, when it came under Chinese control, it became a special administrative region, the same as Macau. These are special administrative regions. These are politico-economic entities within China. So, let's talk about the U.S. federal system. Let's talk about the U.S. Constitution, not about the Chinese Constitution, not about Hong Kong and Macau. I mean, there is no transparency. That's the problem. That's why you see that people elect a pro-statehood government, but they don't vote over 50% for statehood ever. Because we want to have our cake and eat it. We want to be a state of the union with U.S. dollars, with federal aid, with a U.S. passport, but we want our own Miss Universe, we want our own Olympic team. You cannot have it both ways. We want to speak Spanish.
Why is Spanish and culture an issue on politics?
Because there has always been a tradition. I mean, the United States, are they willing? Is the U.S. Congress willing to declare the United States bilingual? Has there not?
Would they have to? Would they have to?
No, they don't. But we are not even bilingual. Puerto Rico is a Spanish-speaking country, as I explained to you. Definitely. So there are bilingual people in Puerto Rico, about 45% of them. But of the really truly bilingual, it's probably about 20%. So now the pro-statehood governor, Fortuño, is starting bilingual education in public schools. And maybe it'll take a generation or two. But when my father was born in 1920, education in Puerto Rico was in English. And he couldn't speak a word of English.
Has pro-independence Puerto Ricans, sympathizers, have they been persecuted?
Oh, yes. They have been persecuted in various ways. But what is interesting is it has always been selective persecution. The U.S. security or police agencies like the FBI have kept files with the local police on Puerto Ricans for being pro-independence. I myself, when I was at the university, had a file on me that was kept by the police and was eventually given back to all people. And when I looked at my file, basically what it said was that I was a standing-up citizen that was non-violent, that I had studied in Europe, but they still kept a file on me because I had been to a rally for independence at one point. So it has been persecuted. The United States has actively, agencies like the FBI and the Puerto Rican police have actively persecuted in the past pro-independence people in such a manner that people found it inconvenient to be pro-independence.
And hasn't that killed or in a way destroyed the independence movement, or like exhausted the independence feeling?
Well, but it was a twofold strategy of persecution and co-option. So if you're a bad boy, we'll put you in jail. If you are a nice boy, we'll give you rewards. And therefore, what happened was the height of the persecution of nationalism was, of course, the 1930s, where you had the Ponce massacre, and you had a number of violent events where the police were persecuting the nationalists. You also had that at the time of the vote for the Puerto Rican Constitution in the 1950s, where Luis Muñoz Marin and his legislature passed a law called as the law of the muzzle, saying that you could not actively publicly say that you wanted to overthrow the government or to oppose the government for independence. At the time of that plebiscite, most of the independentistas were in jail. So there was a time where this was actively done. Now in 2012, the standard of living have been raised so much. There are so much people living on food stamps and depending on federal aid that you don't have to persecute pro-independence people. Those who are for independence are a minority. They are free to speak, but as my cousin said once to me, she was a hardworking Puerto Rican woman. What can the independentistas give me that I don't already have? What can the independentistas give me that I don't already have? Puerto Rico is not bad business for the United States, but you have to understand that in 1898, when the United States invaded Puerto Rico, the first and foremost consideration was a strategic one. Puerto Rico was part of a series of strategically positioned territories in the Caribbean. They would provide the United States control of the routes to the Panama Canal, as well as control to a product that in the 1890s was very important in terms of international trade. That was sugar. Sugar was a major commodity, and the United States imported most of its sugar from the places which eventually they took over: Hawaii, the Philippines, Puerto Rico, and Cuba. By controlling Hawaii and the Philippines, they control the Pacific, ports in the Pacific. By controlling Cuba and Puerto Rico, they control ports in the Caribbean. And so it was a strategic reason, coupled with an economic reason. And you cannot decouple them. They are not mutually exclusive. They are complementary. During World War II, Puerto Rico and the Caribbean became the first line of defense for an invasion of German submarines. And indeed, there were German submarines in the Caribbean. And Puerto Rico was indeed turned into a major military base, both in Roosevelt Roads and Ramey Field. And so Puerto Rico has always been a very important military possession, strategic possession. And if you have a military possession, why not make it profitable? And that's when 936 came in. I mean, after World War II, there was sugar was not anymore the important commodity that it used to be, and there was a section that applied to possessions corporation, which was given for which was applicable to the Philippines originally, and the U.S. companies discovered that this was an advantage. So I think it was 250 something, became in 1948 or 52, I don't remember the exact year, it might have been even 54, became Section 931, which in 1976 became Section 936. So what you have is, okay, this is a military colony, this is a strategic colony. Can we make something, good business? And if you can make good business, you'll make it. Puerto Rico is not good business anymore. I mean, it's bankrupt. There are problems. There are serious problems. But part of it is corruption. It's not the lack of the ability of Puerto Ricans to work. The people who have bankrupted Puerto Rico are not the Puerto Rican working classes. It's the corrupt elite of the PPD and the PNP. And they are in jail. I mean, I wish you could go and interview some of, there is a Secretary of Education that is in jail still from the Rosselló administration. He is part of the reason, he and many others, part of the reason why Puerto Rico is bankrupt.
Why does my generation view government and politics as a synonym for corruption? What has happened in Puerto Rico that has opened the floodgates of corruption? Well,
corruption started, there is the mother of a senator, the mother of Eduardo Batia, wrote an article a long time ago, my colleague, my deceased colleague, Carmen Gautier. She wrote an article about how federal funds had affected municipalities and had affected politicians in Puerto Rico. And she spoke of La Danza de los Millones, the dance of the $1 million, of the millions. And what happened was that at one point, especially after food stamps, millions of dollars were coming in assistance from the federal government to Puerto Rico. And politicians saw that as a possibility of additional income. But remember, all federal funds come earmarked and they come with restrictions. So they had to develop certain schemes to sort of scheme up from the top a little bit. That eventually snowballed into a political elite that was accustomed to devise mechanisms to scheme from the top of federal grants, of governmental funds. 1/3 of the legislature of Rafael Hernandez Colón of the PPD, which was in power from 1984 to 1992, 1/3 of that legislature went to prison for corruption. And then came the administration of Pedro Rosselló. The administration of Pedro Rosselló took that to the next level. In the administration of Pedro Rosselló, according to the cases that have been tried in the federal court, and these were federal cases, these were not local cases, if you wanted a contract from the government, you had to pay the tithe, like you do with the Lord in church. 10% of every contract would be returned to the political party, the New Progressive Party. And so that became the manner of doing business in government. The next government, the government of Sila Maria Calderón, was not run that way, but there were still, I mean, corruption is not at the top necessarily. So maybe Sila Maria Calderón was not corrupt, but she was surrounded by corrupt people who were used to do business that way. And so it has become the way of doing business. The present governor, for example, when he was doing the gas pipeline, the gasoducto, which a colleague of mine calls the pilloducto, the thief line, gave a contract to one of his classmates who was bankrupt. He gave a contract. He was an engineer who had no expertise on doing gas lines, gas pipelines, and he gave a $10 million contract, and he would be subcontracting the people. But the first thing this guy did was to organize a 15-year-old party, a Sweet 15, for his daughter that cost him $350,000 at the Ritz-Carlton. So did the press report it. I wasn't there. Moreover, this guy had been in the board of trustees of the Puerto Rico Development Bank, who was the one who eventually approved the project. So he had inside information, went out, got the contract, and then the pipeline was not constructed. You tell me, what is that? at the very least, is conflict of interest. That's the way this elite does business in Puerto Rico. It is not us, common Puerto Ricans, that are corrupt. We're hardworking people. The political elite is corrupt. But statehood is for the poor was a saying of the Carlos Romero Barceló administration, and basically what it said was that Puerto Ricans will benefit more because we are poorer. I mean, 50% of the Puerto Rican population receives food stamps. Theoretically, 50% of the population would benefit immensely from federal programs if we became a state of the union. But the fact of the matter is that in order for Puerto Rican business for the Puerto Rican economy to thrive, I think the discussion that has been there, I don't know if that is the answer, but the discussion that has been there is about a degree of sovereignty that would allow Puerto Rico to have, to be exempt from coastwide shipping laws or cabotage laws, a degree of self-rule or autonomy, political sovereignty that would allow Puerto Rico to enter into commercial treaties, say, with other Caribbean countries. I think that is, in fact, the wave of the future. I mean, if you want a prosperous Caribbean, you might as well try to create a region that can increase trade with each other, that can increase economic exchanges without restrictions from France or from England or from the United States. So my sense is that unless the U.S. Congress is willing to foot the bill for increased assistance to the poor people, the choice would be for some kind of successful sovereignty. I think it's the book called. About 50% of the population of Puerto Rico feels they are Americans. And if you listen to their discourse, if you listen to the discourse of PNP supporters.
Tell me the statehood party supporters.
Okay. The fact of the matter is that about 50% of the Puerto Rican population, 45 to 50, give or take, support statehood. They feel they are Americans. They may not even speak English, but they feel they are Americans. And if you listen carefully to the discourse of the PNP during this election, part of it is not just we're going to get more federal funds. It is we want equality. We are American citizens and we want equality with the other 50 states. Whether that is true or not, whether that is valid or not, is besides the point. The fact of the matter is that about 50% of the population believes that. And as long as they believe that, the Americans have no choice but to at least consider it. And in fact, presidents of the United States and candidates for presidents of the United States have said that they favor statehood. And there are Americans who consider Puerto Rico part of the United States, even though legally and technically it isn't. So that is one thing. That is one sociological fact that we can corroborate. The other half of the Puerto Ricans believe they are Puerto Ricans and they are a nation, but they are not necessarily for independence. So the two realistic choices, I mean, there is a sector of the Puerto Rican population, about 5 to 7%, who believes in independence. But the majority of Puerto Ricans do not believe in independence. About a 45-45 split is Commonwealth or statehood. And so the question is, what are those other 45% who believe that they are Puerto Ricans, that they want sports sovereignty, they want their own Olympic team, as they do now, as they have now, that they want their own Miss Universe pageant. And I know that it sounds trivial. I was interviewed in the radio in one of the NPR radios in New York, and they were asking me, why is that? I mean, what's the issue? It's a matter of national pride. You know, Puerto Ricans are very happy. The average Puerto Rican, the common Puerto Rican, is very proud of the fact that we have, I think it's 5 or 6 Miss Universes, 4 or 5, and that we are competing with Venezuela for having the most. And in Univision, they have a contest. Look who's dancing, and it is one of the Puerto Rican models against one of Venezuelan ex-Miss Universe. That seems to be very important to people. And this is popular culture.
I keep hearing that argument, and then I go back to thinking, well, if it just comes down to language, Olympics, and Miss Universe, and if it wasn't for that, then you would agree with statehood. Can we just negotiate on those terms, give us statehood, and we can keep? I mean, have the United States specifically said we could give you statehood, but you would have to give up Miss Universe? I mean, Miss Universe is run by Donald Trump. He's a businessman. We can negotiate with him.
I wish it was that simple, but it isn't, because national pride cannot be reduced to those three issues. There are other things. There are things like who we are, and the fact that there is, if I may say it bluntly, there is such a thing as discrimination against Latinos in the U.S. And in fact, you can see it in Arizona. There is discrimination against those who speak Spanish, and Puerto Rico speaks Spanish. The vernacular of Puerto Ricans is Spanish. Even for those Puerto Ricans who do not speak Spanish fluently in the United States, the vernacular is Spanish, and it is very important to them to know some Spanish. Spanish is like Hebrew to the Jewish. You know, the Jewish kids go to Hebrew school until they get their bar mitzvah. In Puerto Rico, if you are a Puerto Rican, you must know some Spanish. You must know the Spanish of the home, sort of a domestic Spanish. You have to like arroz and habichuelas. You have to there, and it is not trivialities. It is not Miss Universe. It is not a basketball team. It is not a boxer. It goes beyond that. It goes about identity. Who are you? We are Puerto Ricans. We are different from Americans. We do not dislike them, but we are different. We are a people.
Speaking of culture, we were mentioning that, I was telling you that I'm obviously younger than you are, and to me the difference, the generational difference and the cultural difference, I've been probably more Americanized than you have been. And of course in the 21st century, there's the book, The World is Flat, and globalization and the America exports culture through Hollywood and through the internet. What's your reaction to that? I mean, haven't we been Americanized enough that we can just become a state, and what was going to be lost has already been lost, and there's nothing, and we are so stubborn, if you can say that, about our culture. We're so in love with our culture that it's almost impossible, no matter if we're enslaved or if we became a state or no matter what, Puerto Ricans will never give up arroz con habichuela.
I went to Quebec, which is a French territory within Canada. They will tell you that. And what is interesting is I saw a bunch of people dressed as 19th century and 18th century Frenchmen. And if you go to Asturias, you will see people dressed as 18th and 19th century Asturians playing the typical music of Asturias. What globalization, one of the byproducts of globalization has been the reaffirmation of local cultures, national cultures. You know, there is a pro-independence nationalist Scottish party. The Welsh have a nationalist party as well. And there is a revival of Scottish culture, of Asturian culture, of French culture in Canada. And it's the same in Puerto Rico. So assimilation has proven impossible. The French Canadians still speaking French. Puerto Ricans still speaking Spanish. Catalonians are now speaking Catalonian as opposed to Spanish, which because remember Catalonian was prohibited during the dictatorship of Franco. So in that sense, what you have is that no matter what happens, I mean, we don't know what globalization is going to bring. But the fact of the matter is that people have reaffirmed themselves as who they are. The question is, what are the political projects and the economic projects that accompany this reaffirmation? And in that sense, the political project that has accompanied Puerto Ricanness has been either autonomy, Commonwealth, or independence, not statehood. If you think of it, Puerto Ricans in the United States do not call themselves Puerto Ricans Americans, or do we? We don't. I mean, Mexicans call themselves Chicanos or Mexican Americans. Black people used to be called black, now they call themselves African Americans. But Puerto Ricans have never called themselves Puerto Rican Americans. And that's an interesting clue as to who we are, how we're treated, or how are we discriminated, or how we feel about the discrimination, and the fact that we are a people. So in that sense...
but how is statehood surrendering our culture? Is statehood surrendering our culture?
It has been presented as assimilation, always. It has been presented as assimilation, always. And the fact of the matter is that when you have the new generation of pro-statehood people, the Fortuño administration in Puerto Rico now, creating bilingual schools and training people in English, it reinforces the perception. Whether it is true or not is a different thing. But it reinforces the perception that we're being prepared to be assimilated into the American culture. And people resent that.
I can see. I mean, if anybody forced me to speak English, I would definitely resent that. But if you told me that if we could become a state and all these great economical things that they keep saying that are going to happen, and if they happen, and on the other hand they say, well, you have to become one with it within the United States, I would say, but how so? I mean, how is it a matter of just language or giving up English? I mean, giving up Spanish in order to become a state, or can we just become a state and still speak Spanish? I mean, there's so much Spanish in California. There's so much Spanish. There could be racism. There could be discrimination. But I mean, we're within ourselves in this island, so we're not going to be racist against ourselves. We might, you know, maybe Pedro Pierluisi up in Congress will be discriminated against.
But it is not an individual question, and it will not be an individual decision. And until Congress says what they propose Puerto Rico to be like if it becomes a state, we won't know what we're voting for. So the assumption that we will be assimilated is as fair as an assumption as the assumption that you are expressing that it may be negotiable. But we don't know. Congress hasn't expressed clearly what it will take for Puerto Ricans to become a state of the union. When they do, when they tell us this is it, these are the conditions and terms under which you will become a state of the union, or these are the conditions and terms under which you would become an autonomous territory, and these are the conditions and terms under which you would become an independent country, then we will know what we are choosing. But in the meantime, it's all speculation, one way or another.
Exactly. It's all speculation.
And that's the problem. That's why, as they say in Puerto Rico, el americano tiene que hablar. The American must speak. Congress has to say, what do they expect? What will they accept as statehood, as Commonwealth, or as independence? They have to say it. We cannot say it. We do not have the sovereignty of Puerto Rico. We are the people of Puerto Rico, but they hold the sovereignty.
I think that this is what this documentary is going to start. It's like, that is what we're doing. That's why you and I were speaking in English, when we cut, we go to Spanish, but because we want them to speak, but they cannot speak if they don't understand.
El americano tiene que hablar. That's a saying in Puerto Rico. I mean, it's not mine. Yeah, you can use me, but it's not mine.
You're not the first one to say it. And it's obviously, it's been used by the Independence Party.
Yeah, el americano tiene que hablar.
And in the Independence Party, if I understood them right, the strategy is, fine, let's vote no on the plebiscite. Let's say we reject the current status. Let's statehood. We want independence, but sure, let's statehood win. Let's force the issue. And we're gonna get independence through the back door, because when we force the issue, they're gonna say they're trusting that they're not gonna give us statehood, and then the path is gonna be independence.
It is a pity that we're taping this documentary today, because if we were taping it on November 8th, and the vote is no, and for statehood, don't you tell me that this is that this is not an oxymoron. No, I don't want Commonwealth. No, I'm sorry. If they say yes and statehood. Yes, I like Commonwealth, but I want statehood. Isn't that an oxymoron? The same as the 1998, none of the above. I don't want this, neither I want that. This is the ballot for the status plebiscite that will be held simultaneously with the elections on November 6th. And it has two parts, and they are non-binding. The first part, you have to vote yes or no whether you are in agreement with maintaining the Commonwealth as it is, the territorial condition of Puerto Rico. That is, as a non-integrated territory of the United States.
Is that as it reads?
No, it reads, are you in agreement with maintaining the political territorial condition of the president? In fact, para que lo edite. Do you agree that Puerto Rico should continue to have its present form of territorial status? It's a non-incorporated territory. That's what Puerto Rico is, and that's what they are asking you. Are you in favor of maintaining a non-incorporated territory? Yes or no? And then the second one is, do you want to vote for statehood, for free association, or for independence? Free association is a reformed Commonwealth, no? Or they call it sovereign free associated state. This is a non-binding plebiscite, and what I wonder is what will happen if Puerto Ricans vote yes.
Show me the yes. Show it.
If they vote yes, and that they want to maintain the territory, and if they vote for statehood, that they want to change the territory. So that would be interesting because that would be an oxymoron. That would be saying, yes, I want to maintain Puerto Rico as an unincorporated territory of the United States, but I favor statehood. In the previous plebiscite in 1998, they voted for none of the above, which again is, I don't want this, I don't want that, I want the opposite. So we are not. My anticipation is, and it's a pity that we are not filming this on November 9th or 10th, because my expectation is that it will be as confusing as the past one. It will not send a clear signal to Congress. It will send another confusing signal that we are not sure what we want in terms of the Puerto Rico status.
One last question. You have the microphone, you have the cameras on you. This is going to be presented in the United States. If you have one thing to say to the American people, Congress, and the President about Puerto Rico's political relationship with the United States, what would that be?
For them to honestly say what does statehood mean to Congress, what does statehood mean, what does Commonwealth means to Congress, and what does independence means to Congress. Once they decide, it may be after a process of consultation, it may be after hearings, but they need to clearly tell the Puerto Rican people what is it that they are willing to give under each of the three alternatives in order for the Puerto Rican people to make a clear choice. Otherwise, we're going to be another 100 years doing this.